session. We've shared a slide before about housekeeping, but just the too long didn't read version is keep your microphone and your camera off and use the chat, and we'll be able to work through that. I'm going to quickly introduce myself and do a short presentation, and then I'll pass on to each of the panelist members in order. So I'll do my share of my camera. This should hopefully work, and I hope everybody can see that there. Smashing. So my name is Hilary Noon, and I'm a Research and Innovation Culture Lead at UKRI, and I'm also the Joint Funder Group Chair. I am going to give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. Remove the lobby doorbell if we can.
I wonder if we might want to wait a couple of minutes, Hilary.
Yeah,
it looks like
okay.
The last session has just finished, I think.
Righto. It's quite distracting with all the doorbells going. I don't know if anyone else is finding that. Okay. For anybody who's just joining us, Dan, do you want to put up your slide again on the housekeeping? And we just had a session just finish. Right, we'll try and figure out how we can turn off the pinging. It's a bit like a game of whack-a-mole, isn't it? Right. So just for anybody who just joined us from the previous session, I'm going to give you a very quick overview. If when the speakers are presenting, keep your camera and your microphones off, and the session will be recorded. Use the chat function to raise any questions. Bearing in mind these will be visible to all, including all attendees and the speakers. But also when we get to the Q&A session, you can raise your hand digitally, which is the reactions at the very top of the button or bar at the button that you can raise your hand. And all of the sessions will be recorded and made available to attendees after the forum. Your name is visible to everybody, so please do use it to contact and network with each other in post-forum discussions. Now that I think the doorbell has quietened down, I am going to start the session. I'm going to introduce myself and I'll introduce all the other panel members in turn. So I am going to quickly, I hope everybody can see that. So my name is Hilary Noon, and I'm a Research and Innovation Culture Lead at UKRI, and I'm also the chair of the Joint Funder Group. But what I'm going to talk about today as part of the session is about narrative CVs, and really to help understand about the narrative CV movement and where it's going, you really need to, it's helpful to know the origins of it within the research and innovation community. This actually goes back to 2014, when the Nuffield Council on Bioethics commissioned activity to look at the culture of scientific research in the UK. And this report, which is available online, gave a really good umbrella overview about the different factors that shape the culture of research. And it really gave an opportunity for many organisations to start addressing the issues around research culture in a more strategic and systemic way. And it helped understand the underlying issues around research culture that ripple across the system and can really negatively impact it. But what came out of this work was actually two main aspects, which was the narrow definitions of success and combined with a really hyper or hugely competitive system. There was a really large survey of the community, which basically gave the evidence and the need that there was something needed to be done. And this was then followed up in 2018 to 2019 by the Royal Society, where they brought together a lot of different internationally recognised biosketches and assessment matrices and application forms together with the research and innovation community, and they co-developed the Résumé for Researchers, which was a collaboration across different sectors, academia, industry, different career stages, and it was looking at what really people wanted to be visible and valued in their work in research, and it was really about moving away from the narrowly focused performance indicators to make it easy to see, reward and nurture the full range of contributions that were necessary to create environments that enable excellence and steward it for the future. So essentially, this was produced by the community, the RNI community, way back when. This is nothing very new. We're just building on the work that has come before us. But really, what is this community developed tool? What is a narrative CV? So on the left here, we have a definition that was devised by DORA, Science Foundation Ireland, UKRI and SNSF. Through a workshop which looked at that a definition of a narrative CV is it provides a structured written description of a researcher's contributions and achievements that reflect a broad range of skills and experience. And the resume for researchers, which the Royal Society developed, is very much the same across 4 modules where somebody could evidence the different contributions combined with a personal statement. And the resume for research and innovation, which we'll hear a bit more about later, is a narrative CV, again, based on the resume for research and innovation, but it's also expanded and evolved to represent the broader population that work in research and innovation. And largely all of this is, these narrative CVs are a direct response to the sustained and ongoing call from our research communities for an improved research culture. And there's really a widespread frustration that employers and funders are at least perceived to focus on a narrow range of metrics relating to past funding and publications when they're looking at hiring or promotion or funding decisions. And this is considered to be driving the negative experiences in poor research culture. So these CVs are amongst the direct responses and strategies to address this. Some of these include DORA, the on responsive research assessment, reward and recognition systems, and also attracting world-class talent and ideas. For example, the UK Government People and Culture Strategy has the rollout of the narrative CVs as one of their Tier 1 commitments. And UKRI plays 2 roles in this. So one of them is the UKRI adoption itself, which my colleague Abby will talk about shortly, but also the RNI community adoption. So this is a strand of work that includes the joint funders group, so looking at it in funding decisions, which I'll talk about, the alternative uses group, which Dan will talk about, and also events where we're sharing the work to support widespread adoption. So a little bit about the joint funders group. So this was established in summer 2021, and this was following the government publication of the R&D People and Culture Strategy, where there was a commitment to roll out narrative CVs based on the Royal Society's resume for researchers. And this group was led and set up by UKRI to reassure the community that wherever possible, aligned approaches to adoption would be found. Because after all, we're a global RNI community and people don't just apply to or review for just one funder or organisation. So this group explores shared approaches to this transformative culture change tool that enables wider recognition and visibility of much wider contributions. And the group has really grown in membership since its inception to include funders from different countries, disciplines and sectors, and it really fosters a safe place to share learning and develop aligned materials to help those at different stages of adoption, and co-developing resources that are made available in Résumé Library, and sharing it with evidence and evaluation work to monitor for any unintended consequences, but also to build public trust and transparency in this area. And this work aligns with UKRI's principles for change on diversity, so shifting what's visible and valued, the connectivity, so innovating new ways of partnering and sharing, building resilience by creating shared solutions for shared problems, and engagement, so reaching out to all of the communities that the Joint Funder Group and UKRI serve. So the Résumé Library, and I'll post a link in the chat, has a range of resources to support funders to get involved in this, from templates to high-level principles and guidance and starters. and also a quality impact assessment, so people are being responsible in how they develop these, and also a shared evaluation framework, which includes both the process experience and also EDI in the widest terms. So not just protected characteristics, but aspects such as, career movements and movements across sector as well. And the next areas of the group are looking at are things on training and tools that be made available for all, data sharing frameworks, and key lines of messages to help with wider adoption. Here are just a couple of the members of the joint funded group, which has doubled in size since its inception, and it's open to other funders to join as well. So that is the whistle stop tour in terms of an introduction to this area. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and ask Dan Wake, who is the chair of the Alternative Uses Group, to share his screen and introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Can everyone see my screen, my presentation okay? Is that all working?
Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. So yeah, thanks, Hilary. Hilary helpfully set out some of the context behind the work we're doing and the fantastic work as well that UKRI and others have been doing around the narrative CV. So I'm going to say a little bit about the development of the Alternative Uses Group, which was developed a little bit behind the Joint Funders Group in December time last year. But we very much see this group as having a coordinated complementary approach with the Joint Funders Group to develop aligned resources and ultimately encourage the widespread adoption of the narrative CV. So I chair that group, very pleased to chair that group and work closely with Hilary and colleagues on that group. So as I say, yeah, it was developed in partnership with UKRI. It complements the efforts of the Joint Funders Group, and we hope that the efforts of both the Joint Funders Group and the Alternative Uses Group will combine to minimise unnecessary bureaucracy through those shared approaches, and I guess accelerate culture change as well through enabling a more efficient, cohesive, comprehensive approach to taking a look at what's visible and valued across a range of personal and organisational needs. So it looks at those alternative applications of the narrative CV in the assessment of people, so things like hiring and promotion, for example. And then hopefully the group will help to make sure that we ultimately want to attract and retain the full range of the most promising research and innovation talent. It enables the research and development workforce, hopefully as well, to demonstrate who they are as individuals, and then also how they contribute to teams in the wider research and innovation sector as well. And as with the Joint Funders Group, we hope to be sharing learning and best practice as well to help others to engage with the narrative CV as well. A host of universities and other organisations in the research and innovation community are a part of this group. I should caveat that those are on the group for slightly different stages in terms of their adoption. Some are just thinking about it, some are piloting it, some are slightly further along than that. But it's really good to have that kind of diversity of experiences that we can all talk about as a group. Hilary's mentioned some of the reasons why organisations are thinking about adopting it. One, as kind of mentioned already, is around the reducing bureaucracy, making things a bit easier for people. One is inclusivity, so kind of providing a better description of different pathways, sort of hopefully allowing a broader range of people and ideas and outputs to be highlighted as part of that. Recognising the breadth of contributions and making sure that we have a system that incentivises to value a much wider range of those contributions. Recognising skills needed to deliver teamwork as well and collaborations and contributions, so moving beyond the kind of the standard approach to looking at experience. Also helpfully, we want to just kind of see making sure that reviewers that may be unfamiliar with disciplines or sectors, making sure they have a kind of a better understanding of the significance and impact of other contributions as well. There's a few things that we're kind of hoping to look at as part of this group and kind of feed that back into the Joint Funders Group as well. In terms of how that group will operate, we've got a few processes in place for this as well. So the first is to kind of test out, evaluate the alternative applications of the narrative CV. There's quite a few reasons we might want to adopt alternative approaches, which I can talk about in a second, but that's what that group is hoping to do. That includes, outside of grant funding decisions as well. So as I mentioned, in recruitment and promotion activities. As I mentioned as well, we also want to contribute to the broader sharing of best practice and in alternative uses of the CV, making sure we're kind of shifting, so using it as a tool to shift what's visible and valued and accelerate that culture change in a cohesive way. We also, recognise there are challenges involved with this process as well, and we want to be able to address those challenges in applying the CV in all settings to allow practical action to be taken. And then importantly as well, making sure we kind of have aligned approaches to all of this and thinking about how we might utilise those resources and evidence and training that's going on here, which support its wider adoption and use in alternative applications. So there's a few things that we're hoping to achieve there. As I mentioned, and as Hilary mentioned with the joint funders group, we're developing a Résumé Library, which we're hoping to share with you very soon. We're in the kind of the final stages in terms of some of the outputs actually already, which is great, but it will include things like templates, synthesis on use, so examples of current usage, how it's been used, like how it's been integrated, thoughts on training, that kind of thing. Pilot starter guide as well to support organisations who are interested in trialling the narrative CV as well, just to provide a bit of a guide for maybe those thinking about running a pilot as part of the journey towards adopting the CV in their organisation and thinking about that from the pilot stage through to the evaluation stage. Also key lines and messages as well we're hoping to bring out soon, hopefully to support organisations to demonstrate the benefits of the narrative CV and give a bit of evidence on why and where are the positive impacts of using the CV and providing a bit of a guide on why organisations are adopting them. And there's lots of resources in the pipeline as well. So I've listed a few here on applicant review guidance, high-level principles, and quality impact assessments, all kinds of things that we're working towards, and also the shared evaluation framework as well, just to make sure that we're constantly thinking about the revision and future development of these resources and building our evidence base on the use of these narrative CVs as well. So lots going on here, and I can keep you all updated on progress as we work through it. I just wanted to return to the sector strategies again and bring it back to what we're trying to achieve. So Hilary's mentioned some of this already, but just making sure, as I say, that the wider contributions of researchers and the career progress is more broadly recognised and valued as part of the process. Also supporting people that want to, perhaps return back into the R&D sector, returning from industry, from leave, career breaks, however they might want to return, making sure that we kind of recognise their prior experiences and contributions as part of this process. Making sure as well as part of that any activities beyond the kind of the core research are recognised as well. And as I mentioned at the start, just making sure we can do things in a more efficient and effective way, stripping away the unnecessary bureaucracy and just making sure that people are able to apply or get promoted in kind of a more joined up way than perhaps it is at the moment. And hopefully we can support those efforts more and more in the coming months. So that's everything from me. Do let us know if you'd like to find out more about the group, be interested in being involved, or indeed willing to share examples of how your organisation has been thinking about adopting the narrative CV, or even before that, just thinking about the narrative CV more generally. It'd be great to hear your views on that. So do get in touch. But I'll now hand back to Hilary.
Smashing, thank you, Dan. I pasted in the chat the link to the Alternative Uses group if anybody'd like to find out more. I'm now going to hand to my colleague Abby Reynolds to introduce herself, and we'll hear a little bit more about the UKRI work. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen, and if you would kindly tell me if it's worked again. Is that all right?
Perfect.
Excellent. Fab. Yeah. So hi, I'm Abby. I am also an R&I culture lead in UKRI, and you've just heard about Hilary's kind of side of the work on the community adoption, but I work more on the adoption of our own version of the narrative CV, so the resume for research and innovation across the whole of UKRI. So eventually this format is going to be used in all UKRI funding opportunities that require track record information. And at the moment, we're in a piloting stage with the aim to kind of ramp up the number of pilots that we're doing across UKRI in the next 6 months to about a year. And the main focus on this stage is using a consistent format across the whole of UKRI to try and minimise confusion, because we know that lots of people apply to different funding opportunities, and to try and reduce the bureaucracy as well. In the piloting phase, we've been trialling it in lots of different types of funding opportunity and getting feedback and incorporating that feedback into the next pilots and iteratively improving it. And so at the moment, the main thing that's in the pipeline is we're currently working on some web pages to give some high-level guidance on how to use R4RI, and that should be published in the next couple of months. And work is also ongoing to develop some additional support materials too. So what does R4RI actually look like? It's, well, if you saw my previous slide, this is the format, but I'll go into detail of the 4 boxes. So R4RI is broken down into these 4 modules. I'm not going to read out individual ones just for timing, but feel free to have a little read. The structure basically is designed to give you an opportunity to describe the whole breadth of what you do and to help you think a bit more broadly about what you actually contribute to the R&I landscape, and to highlight very much that you are not just a list of your publications or a list of your funding. So why are UKRI using R4RI? So Hilary sort of gave quite a good background of this and has already mentioned the R&D people and culture strategy. But really, this is all about the fact that UKRI really strongly believes that people are at the heart of research and innovation. And that is exemplified by our strong involvement in the people and culture strategy. But also it's very, very prominent in our recently published UKRI strategy. So we've got a new 5-year strategy. And it's one of the first objective of our strategy is all about people and careers and building an attractive and supportive environment for research and innovation. So R4RI is one of these ways that we are trying to support this shift in research and innovation culture. And it all comes down to, as we've already said, about broadening what is visible and valued in our assessment processes. So this is what this, we tend to use this iceberg diagram, which I think exemplifies it quite nicely. All of the things that are above that waterline up here are things that are traditionally recognised in traditional academic CVs. But we know that you're doing, as researchers and innovators are doing far more than that. All the work that's underneath that waterline, like peer review, involvement in panels, management experience, leadership, all of those things are absolutely critical for the whole research and innovation endeavour, and they should be recognised too. So R4RI is about recognising stuff above and below that waterline. And I think Dan whizzed through this earlier too, but the open and kind of flexibility of R4RI also brings a number of these other benefits that are in our flower diagram, which I will just very briefly whiz through. So reducing bureaucracy, by that I mean we're replacing what is currently a very varied format. A standard academic CV doesn't really have a consistent format, and there's different guidance depending on what kind of funding opportunity you're applying to. So we're replacing that with a single approach across the whole of UKRI. We want to make it more inclusive, so to allow for a better description of career path and reducing focus on our kind of continuous productivity to allow a broader range of people and ideas and outputs to be highlighted. We want to try and create the right incentives for a healthy functioning R&I system. We want to recognise team science and collegiality, and we want to try and also reduce barriers across disciplines and sectors. So R4RI allows you to describe a breadth of outputs and put it into context for reviewers who might be unfamiliar with your discipline or sector. And also it hits our responsible assessment, so by reducing focus on lists and quantity of outputs and increasing the focus on quality of outputs. So that you're assessed as a whole picture rather than a list of publications. And just very briefly, I just wanted to also talk through our evaluation. So I've already said we're accelerating over the next 6 to 12 months, and part of this is making sure that we are learning from all of those pilots and learning as much as possible. And one way we're doing that is through an RRI user survey, which is now live on UKRI's engagement hub, collecting information from applicants and assessors. And that is very strongly based on the work done by the Joint Funders Group, the shared evaluation framework. And that's so that we can build an evidence base that is consistent across the whole of the Joint Funders Group, so that we can share learnings across all of our different funders. And we are also currently developing a wider evaluation plan to look beyond kind of just the user experience too. So thank you. I will hand back to Hilary.
Thank you, Abby. And we're now going to hear from Liz Simmons, Head of Research Culture at the University of Cambridge. Over to you, Liz.
Hi, so I'm not going to use any slides. There's weird kind of chat things being shared in the screen. It's like all meta.
I'm not sure whose screen that is, but if Abby, are you still sharing your screen? I think you might be.
Yeah. So yes, sorry, I'm going to just talk through a project that we are about to kick off in a couple of months' time in Cambridge, where we will be doing some interesting investigative work on narrative CV. So our project is part of a wider project funded by Research England, and the aim of the project is to take ideas that are being proposed by the sector as ways that it might improve research culture and rigorously test those. So for us, narrative CVs was a no-brainer because there's so much momentum behind them in the sector at the moment. And I think it would be fair to say the reception is mixed. Certainly at Cambridge, we are seeing a degree of scepticism in our institution, particularly among academics, though I know that in other institutions, sometimes there's scepticism from professional services staff who might have to implement some of the changes. But either way, if we're going to change to a completely new format, it will place quite a lot of burden on applicants and reviewers who will have to cope with this very different way of applying and looking at things. So we need to make sure that narrative CVs are doing what we want them to do, and also that we have it in an optimal format. So there has been quite a bit of work done already looking at, I would say, the reception of narrative CV, so what people think about the format in general. Work done early on by the University of Glasgow, a couple of studies done by European institutions who are pioneering use of their own format of narrative CVs, but no real sense yet of kind of comparatively testing them, I guess, with standard CVs to see if we can see any kind of measurable difference. And as I explain what we're planning to do and some of the challenges we're facing, it might become obvious why that hasn't been done yet, because it's the more we get into it, the more complicated it becomes. But what we are planning to do at the very top level is compare a narrative CV and a standard CV in live recruitment processes. And the reason we've chosen to do it in live recruitment processes is because we feel that when you set up mock processes, that maybe people don't necessarily behave in exactly the way they would if it was an actual live process. So I will try and explain in as concise a way as possible how we're actually approaching this. So we are going to ask applicants to submit a standard academic CV and a narrative CV in their application. And then we're going to take selection panels and we're going to divide them in two, and we're going to give one half the narrative CV and one half the standard CV and ask them to rank the candidates. We're then going to provide them with the other half of the information and ask them to rank the candidates again. And there we will be able to see if there is any difference in the way candidates are ranked, depending on whether you're looking at the narrative CV or the standard CV. We obviously, around this kind of quantitative work, intending to do lots of kind of narrative interview work with the people who are part of this process. So both the academics who are reviewing the applications and the researchers who are applying. And I have to say that we're planning on doing this with postdoc recruitment in the first instance, partly because at Cambridge we have a a really sizable amount of postdoc recruitment going on. I've just seen a question coming in saying, what size are the panels? That is a very interesting question, because obviously good practice is that you have more than one person on a selection panel, but I think we all know that there are recruitments that go on that maybe don't have more than one person on them. So I think we would expect a minimum of 2 and maybe a few more. So, I mean, one of the challenges obviously with this is getting people to agree to be part of this process. And so we've had quite a lot of discussions with academics. So I can see the questions coming in. I'll get to that one in a second. So we've spoken to some academics about whether they would be willing to be involved in experiments like this. And what we are planning to do is offer them, I suppose, administrative support through the recruitment process in return for them being involved in the experiment. And the we hope in a way that allowing them to be involved in rigorous research to help test these would encourage some people to be engaged, because it's a way of them, I suppose, really contributing to whether or not this new way of working will be successful. But also we've had suggestions that if you find relatively new PIs who perhaps have got their first grant and are about to recruit for the first time, that offering them support through that process would be a way of engaging them as well and get them involved. Now, second question, if you give applicants you have to ask them to do 2 CVs, and yes, that we've talked about this question a lot because we were aware from the very beginning that it places quite a burden on the applicants. So there are a couple of ways that we're trying to get around this one. So firstly, the idea that they're going to have to produce a narrative CV at some point in the future means that they're putting work into something which will hopefully be useful to them anyway. So it's not an entirely wasted effort, but also we are going to offer participants the opportunity to get feedback on their narrative CV as part of the process, as a way of kind of compensating them for being involved. We are at the moment working on the ethics application for this, and it's not straightforward. And like I said, this is why I think when we started out with this idea, we were quite excited about it, but the more we get into it, the more complicated it becomes. And we still don't know yet, you know, it could, for example, put some candidates off completely from applying. We kind of have to take that risk. We're not sure if we will see an effect, if we will be able to measure the effects we see, and even then, what kind of effect are we looking for? What would we call success? So, you know, we had discussions at quite an early stage about if you're ranking a shortlist, say you've got, I don't know, 6 people on your shortlist, and the narrative CV changes the 6th person on the list. Does that make any difference ultimately with the decision process? So there are lots and lots of questions. And I can see millions of questions pinging in, which I'll come to in a second to kind of talk you through this. But ultimately, what we're looking at doing is, I guess, helping to optimize the format. We're going to be working on the R4RI template as our first narrative CV, because it's in the UK, and that's the one we're all using. But we do have partners as well in the Netherlands, Switzerland and Germany. And obviously the Netherlands and Switzerland have their own formats, and we do hope to kind of do some collaborative work and perhaps look at other aspects of their applications as well. We intend to help produce supporting materials and training courses and all the kind of things that will go around the adoption of such a format, and hopefully from the rigorous testing support buy-in from the academic community. So if we're able to say, look, we've really put this through a rigorous test and we can show that they produce positive effects, hopefully that will encourage people to be involved. Okay, I'm going to, I've been looking at notes and I'm just coming to the questions. Do you want me to answer all these things that have been pinging in?
Well, we might not have time because there's other questions as well that have been asked about the wider area. So I'll try and kind of come to.
I'll hand to you to chair, Hilary. Yeah.
There's a lot of questions around this area, and it's great because this is also about you know, exemplified here is a very responsible approach to basically policy intervention, and that everyone is taking the approach of piloting, looking at protocols and guidance, and then evaluating and sharing the evidence from these things, and then about evolving and iterating whatever process is happening. And while there might be a UK version, like with the Résumé for Research and Innovation, there's a lot of shared common attributes across all of them internationally. So groups like the Joint Funded Group and Alternative Uses Group, which both Liz and UKRI are members of, are sharing that best practice globally to avoid duplication of effort and to have some kind of consistency in this space. So to look at some of the questions here, there's one that's been mentioned at the very start, which is from G.J. McFarlane, which has been some concern about the use of narrative CVs for things like promotion and applications, and this may increase inequalities and disadvantage certain groups. Any thoughts on how we might ensure that this is not the case? Now, I'm wondering, Dan and Liz, would you like to try and answer that, given that you're looking at supporting the use of these in the promotion area? Dan, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think probably from my point of view, it's just a flag that we do recognise that there are challenges involved in this, and things that the group do want to discuss. I mentioned that we want to come up with some outputs that talk about the equality impact assessment, for example, and maybe some guides around that. So I think probably from my perspective, just a flag that, yeah, there are things that we need to work through. We need to work out the impact of what a narrative CV might be in practice, and we really want to support the sector in understanding that impact as well. So just to say, we're working on it, we're discussing it as a group, and we'll be able to share, the resources that come out of those as well to help inform your own thinking about adopting it as well.
And Liz?
I mean, yeah, it's the same answer really. I think we're aware, and I it's something that concerns me as well, actually, because having kind of for a long time supported postdocs as a careers advisor, I can see the how those who are able to craft a good narrative can be played, and that may not be necessarily explicitly, men or whatever, or groups with big advantages, but it will, I think, be something we need to pay attention to. So we're hoping that the data that we can get through our experiments will be sufficiently large that we'll be able to look at least the gender and perhaps some other EDI aspects in a bit more detail.
Smashing. And there has been mention further on in the chat about how it will be shared in terms of the ethics and the review around, and asking if that can be shared with the community alongside results. There is a question here for Abby. In terms of when the UKRI will be introducing the narrative CVs as standard across all funding applications?
Yep, I can answer that in some vague sense. The timelines are not set in stone yet, and it will somewhat depend on how the next phase of piloting goes, and whether we have any evidence that it is disadvantaging groups, for example, might affect timescales while we adjust and work out additional support materials and guidance that are required. But I think it's not likely to be for another 2 years at the very earliest. So it's quite a long lead in. I expect you will come across it in the odd piloting funding opportunity through UKRI first before it's across the whole of UKRI. Hope that answers it in some sense.
Thank you. Another one, this possibly for you, Liz. Interested to hear the reason of why choosing PDRAs versus academic posts, given they have different career stages, very different level of experience, and therefore expect different outcomes.
Yeah, so we actually thought at Cambridge it would be easiest to do it at the postdoc level, because people would be I don't want to say wouldn't care as much, but perhaps be a bit more relaxed about experimenting with that level of recruitment. But also because we have so much postdoc recruitment going on at Cambridge, it was just where we could get the most opportunity from. But we would like to extend it into academic recruitment as we kind of establish the protocol for testing and see how it goes. So
matching. I've got two that might be of interest here. I'm going to bunch these together. Is it expected that the narrative CV prompts will evolve over time, or will they remain static? And how is this, I'm going to pose this to all three, so Abby, Dan and Liz, and how is this actually going to be considered in terms of integration across systems, so that it's a better interoperability with other areas? So Abby, you might have something in terms of this. In some have suggested that there could be an online application form with questions. Is this something that we consider that will start to change over time, or it can be integrated into different systems across the area? So I'll ask Abby first, and then Dan, and then Liz, you might be able to share from a piloting perspective.
Yeah, so for us, absolutely the questions and the prompts may change over time. As I said, at the moment, we're focusing on trying to get some consistency across UKRI, because there's been lots of pilots, but they've all been slightly different versions of a narrative CV format. So this next phase of pilots we'll use are for RI as it stands, which will be published alongside our web pages, and we're going to stick with those for a bit. But if they don't necessarily work, then they will change. In terms of integrating it with systems, UKRI is developing its new funding system, which is already being piloted, and R4RI will be incorporated in the new funding service. Yeah.
And Dan?
Great, thanks. And for the integration perspective, yeah, I mean, probably just to say that it's really important. Again, it's something we're looking at. It goes back to the bureaucracy perspective. We want everything to be joined up. We want some consistency across organisations. So in terms of concrete examples of that, we probably haven't quite got there yet as an alternative users group, but helpful to know that this is of interest and absolutely something we can take back and have a conversation about as a group.
And Liz?
Sorry, my mic was being funny. It's quite challenging making changes to the one system at the moment that we need to change in the university to do it in recruitment. However, there are a lot of transformation programs going on in the university at the moment where we're all trying to talk to each other a bit more. So, you know, it would be our ambition, but the reality of trying to integrate multiple systems is a bit of a headache. So I don't know how soon that'll be.
I'm very mindful of the time, and I'm very conscious we haven't got through all of the questions, and there are some there that references things like, say, the burden for applicants with various different versions, potentially with things like examples, anonymised, just to say that these things are all on the radar of both the Joint Funder Group and the Alternative Uses Group, and a lot of other groups like DORA and Science Europe, we are all working together to try and have aligned approaches wherever possible. But it's no mean feat doing this in a big sector response. Much like what Liz has said, even on an organisation level, this is quite complex. But it's exciting. It's exciting, and it's got potential for a lot of great positive things. I just want to say thank you very much to the panelists, Abby, Dan and Liz, and to say thank you very much for all of you joining us. We'll make sure that we pick up any of the questions that we haven't answered in the chat, and wishing you all the best for the rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.